The P-47 Thunderbolt was too heavy to dogfight. That was what everyone believed. German pilots believed it. American bomber crews believed it. Even some 8th Air Force commanders were starting to believe it. The Thunderbolt was huge, almost 7 tons empty, a flying tank with 8 machine guns, a massive engine, and an airframe built like a brick. Against a Focke-Wulf 190 or a Messerschmitt 109, the math looked terrible. The German fighters were lighter. They turned faster. They could cut inside the big American fighter and get behind it. In a turning fight, the P-47 was supposed to die, and in the spring and summer of 1943, it often did. Thunderbolts were being shot down. Bomber crews were still being attacked. The Luftwaffe was confident, and the generals were already looking toward a replacement. The P-51 Mustang was coming. The Thunderbolt looked like a failed experiment. Then one American commander asked a different question. What if the P-47 was not supposed to turn? What if everyone was fighting the wrong kind of fight? His name was Hubert Zemke. He commanded the 56th Fighter Group, and he understood something the Germans had not fully respected. The P-47 could not turn with a Focke-Wulf, but it could dive. It could dive faster than almost anything in the sky. It could stay stable, at speeds that terrified other pilots. It could hit from above, rip through a formation, and climb back before the enemy could react. So Zemke stopped trying to make the Thunderbolt fight like a lightweight dogfighter. He turned it into a high-speed executioner. And when the Luftwaffe came for American bombers over Europe, Zemke's pilots dropped out of the sky like falling steel. This is the story of Hubert Zemke and the 56th Fighter Group. The pilots who turned the too heavy P-47 into the deadliest American fighter group in Europe, the men who proved that the right tactic could save the wrong airplane. And the commander who changed the air war by refusing to fight the enemy's fight. In 1943, the American daylight bombing campaign was in deep trouble. The 8th Air Force was sending B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators deep into occupied Europe, factories, rail yards, aircraft plants, oil targets. The goal was to smash the German war machine from the air, but every mission came with a brutal cost. The bombers were big, they were tough, they had many guns, but they were not fast. And when German fighters found them, the sky became a killing ground. Bomber crews depended on fighter escorts. Without escorts, German pilots could attack from the front, from the side, from above, from below. They could make repeated passes until bombers fell out of formation. A straggling bomber was almost doomed. The early escort fighters had limits. The Spitfire could fight beautifully, but it did not have the range. The P-38 had range, but it struggled in European high-altitude winter conditions. The P-47 was strong and powerful, but many pilots thought it was too heavy. It could not turn like the German fighters. It could not stay close to the bombers, and also outmaneuver the Luftwaffe. German pilots noticed. They learned the P-47's weaknesses. They tried to drag it into turning fights. If a Thunderbolt pilot accepted that fight, he was in danger. The German aircraft could turn tighter. They could force an overshoot. They could get on the P-47's tail. That was the old problem. A good airplane being used in the wrong way. Hubert Zemke saw the problem clearly. He was not interested in pretending the Thunderbolt was something it was not. The P-47 was not light. It was not graceful in a turn. It was not a knife fighter. But it had gifts. A huge Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine, a rugged airframe, high-speed stability, a powerful dive, and 8.50 caliber machine guns that could tear an enemy fighter apart in one burst. Zemke believed the answer was not to make the P-47 better at turning. The answer was to stop turning, use altitude, use speed, use momentum, attack from above, dive through the enemy formation. Fire in one fast pass, then climb back to altitude and do it again. No circling, no slow turns, no horizontal dogfights, no fighting on German terms. The tactic was simple to describe. Hard to master. A pilot had to think vertically. Altitude became money. Speeder became a weapon. A dive became the attack. A climb became the reset. If a German fighter turned, let him turn. Do not follow him into his strength. Climb away. Reposition, strike again. That was Zemke's idea, and the 56th Fighter Group drilled it over and over. High-speed gunnery passes. Diving attacks, energy management, formation discipline. Never get slow, never waste altitude, never let the enemy choose the fight. The P-47 was not going to become a ballerina. It was going to become a hammer. By October 1943, Zemke was ready to test the idea in combat. The mission would send American bombers deep toward German targets. The Luftwaffe would come. Everyone knew it. German radar would detect the bomber stream. Chiller would scramble fighters. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s would climb into position. Then they would dive on the bombers. That was the usual pattern. But Zemke planned something different. Instead of staying tight beside the bombers, his P-47s would fly above them. Far above them, the bombers would fly around 22,000 feet. The Thunderbolts would wait at roughly 30,000, 8,000 feet of altitude, 8,000 feet of stored energy. When the Germans climbed to attack the bombers, Zemke's pilots would already be above them, ready to dive, ready to strike, ready to turn the Luftwaffe's own doctrine against it. On October 4, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group climbed into position, 52 P-47 Thunderbolts heavy, powerful waiting above the bomber stream. German fighters began forming ahead of the bombers. They were focused on the B-17s. They expected the American escorts to be close to the formation. They expected a familiar fight. They did not expect 52 Thunderbolts above them. Zemke saw the German fighters. Then he rolled his P-47 into a steep dive. The rest of the group followed. 7-ton fighters fell out of the sky. The airspeed climbed 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, then more. The Thunderbolts came down like a storm of metal. The Germans did not look up in time. Zemke's first burst ripped into a Focke-Wulf. The German fighter dropped away, then the rest of the 56th came through, not in a swirling dogfight. Not in slow turns, in brutal diving passes. Each P-47 carried 8 Browning machine guns. When the group fired, the sky filled with .50 caliber fire. German pilots tried to brake. They tried to turn, they tried to dive away, but the Thunderbolts were already moving too fast. The P-47s did not stay to turn with them. They fired, dove through, then used their speed to climb back above the fight. The German formation scattered. Pilots who had been preparing to attack bombers suddenly had to defend themselves. That was the shift Zemke wanted. He was not reacting to German attacks. He was breaking them before they formed. Again and again, the Thunderbolts attacked from above. The Germans could not force the big American fighters into the turning fight they wanted. The P-47s would not accept it. If a German fighter turned away, the Thunderbolt climbed. If the enemy tried to regroup, the Thunderbolt dove again. The fight lasted minutes, but the effect was enormous. The German attack collapsed. The bombers kept flying. The P-47 had done exactly what people said it could not do. It had beaten German fighters, not by becoming lighter, not by turning tighter, but by fighting vertically. By the time the 56th landed, the reports sounded almost impossible. German fighters destroyed, bombers protected. No American fighters lost. The Thunderbolt had not failed. The tactics had changed, but one good mission was not enough. The air war over Europe was not won in one day. The Luftwaffe still had hundreds of fighters. American bombers were still taking terrible losses. 8th Air Force still had to decide whether deep daylight raids could continue, so October became the proving ground. The 56th Fighter Group kept flying. Bremen, Münster, Wilhelmshaven, Düren, industrial targets, rail centers, aircraft plants. Each mission drew German fighters into the sky. Each mission tested Zemke's doctrine. On some days, the results were spectacular. The 56th positioned high-weighted, then dove on German formations before they reached the bombers. German fighters were destroyed. Others broke away. The bomber streams survived attacks that might have devastated them months earlier. The Thunderbolt was becoming something the Luftwaffe had not expected. A heavy fighter that refused to fight heavy. A big aircraft that used gravity as a weapon. Then came October 14th. The second Schweinfurt raid, one of the bloodiest days of the American bomber war. Hundreds of B-17s went after ball-bearing factories deep in Germany. The Luftwaffe threw everything at them. The scale of the battle overwhelmed the escort system. There were too many German fighters, too many attack waves, too much distance. The 56th fought hard and claimed many kills. But the bombers suffered terrible losses. Dozens of B-17s went down. Hundreds of American airmen were killed or captured. Schweinfurt showed a painful truth: better tactics helped. But they could not solve everything alone. There were still not enough long-range escorts. The bombers were still vulnerable. The air war was still in crisis. 4 days later, the debate continued. Some commanders argued that deep penetration raids should be suspended. Some believed the P-47 was still too limited, too short-ranged, too heavy, too imperfect. But Zemke and the 56th kept proving their case. On another mission to Germany, the group climbed high above the bomber stream. German fighters rose to attack. This time, among them was a highly experienced Luftwaffe leader, Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, a veteran combat pilot, a man who understood air fighting. His formation prepared to attack the American bombers. That Zemke's Thunderbolts were already above them. The P-47s dove from higher altitude. They struck from behind and above at extreme speed. German pilots never saw the first pass coming. The combat was short and violent. Fighters went down in minutes. Galland's aircraft was hit and destroyed. One of the Luftwaffe's experienced leaders was gone. Again, the lesson was clear. If the Germans could force a turning fight, the P-47 was vulnerable. But if Zemke's pilots controlled altitude and speed, the Luftwaffe was in danger. By the end of October, the 56th Fighter Group had become the top-scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force. The group, once doubted for flying the wrong airplane, was now producing results no one could ignore. And the Germans noticed. The Luftwaffe began studying the American change. German fighter leaders understood that the P-47s were no longer simply escorting bombers. They were hunting fighters. They were attacking the interceptors before those interceptors could attack the bombers. That mattered. In the old pattern, German fighters chose when and where to strike. Now Zemke was trying to seize that choice first. German controllers adapted. They sent formations from different angles, different altitudes, different directions, high groups, low groups, flanking groups. The goal was to split the escorts. Force the Americans to divide attention, create gaps for fighters to reach the bombers. Zemke answered with layers: one squadron high, one squadron lower, one in the middle. If Germans came high, the top squadron dove. If Germans came low, the lower squadron dove. If the attack split, the middle squadron could support either side. It was not chaos. It was vertical organization. The 56th was not just diving randomly. They were building a three-dimensional defense around the bomber stream, a defense that attacked. And it worked. On mission after mission, German fighters found themselves hit before they could complete their runs. Sometimes they broke off. Sometimes they scattered. Sometimes they died. The P-47 had become a problem the Luftwaffe could not easily solve. By late 1943, other American fighter groups wanted to know what Zemke was doing differently. The answer was not secret. It was discipline. Fight the airplane you have, not the airplane you wish you had. The P-47 could not turn like a German fighter. Accept it. Do not argue with physics. Use what the airplane does well: altitude, dive speed, durability, firepower. Zemke explained the tactics to other commanders. Some resisted. They had been trained in traditional fighter combat. Turning fights, close maneuvering, dogfighting. That was what many pilots imagined when they thought of air combat. Zemke was telling them to stop. With the Thunderbolt, a turning fight was often a trap. The correct move was to attack fast and leave fast. Do not linger, do not get slow. Do not let the enemy pull you into his fight. Think in energy, think in height, think in speed. That idea would become more important far beyond the P-47. It was not just a Thunderbolt lesson, it was a fighter pilot lesson. But the P-47 made the lesson unavoidable. The airplane punished pilots who ignored physics. It rewarded pilots who understood energy. That was why Zemke's group became so dangerous. They were not lucky. They were not reckless. They were disciplined. They knew the rules of their own machine, and they made the Luftwaffe play by those rules. Then came Big Week in February 1944. The 8th Air Force planned a massive series of attacks against German aircraft production. Bombers would strike factories across Germany. The goal was not only to destroy industry. It was to force the Luftwaffe into the sky, bring German fighters up, fight them, kill them, break the fighter force before the invasion of France. For this, escort fighters had to go farther than ever before. That created another problem for the P-47 range. The Thunderbolt was powerful, but thirsty. It did not naturally have the long escort reach commanders wanted. The Mustang was gaining attention because it could go deep. But engineers and crews worked on extending the P-47's range with external tanks. More fuel meant more distance, but also more weight. A fully fueled P-47 with external tanks was heavy, very heavy. It needed long runways. It climbed slowly. It was vulnerable while loaded. Zemke calculated the solution: use the external tanks during the climb and early flight. Burn that fuel first. Drop the tanks before entering enemy airspace. Cross into combat at the right weight, with altitude, with internal fuel, with the airplane ready to fight. Again, it was mathematics: fuel, coiled, altitude, timing. If the tanks were dropped too early, the fighters might not have the range. Drop them too late, and the P-47s would be too heavy to fight well. Get the timing right, and Berlin itself was within reach. During Big Week, the 56th flew long and brutal missions. The P-47s escorted bombers deep into Germany. German fighters adapted. They no longer always massed in big formations. Sometimes they spread into smaller groups. They attacked from different directions. They tried to fragment the escort fight. That made the battle harder. Instead of one formation to smash, there were many. Instead of one clean dive, pilots found themselves in scattered individual fights. But the principles remained. Keep energy. Use the dive. Do not get slow. Do not turn with the enemy. When German fighters tried to follow P-47s in steep dives, some could not handle the speed and stress. The Thunderbolt was built for punishment. Its structure was strong. Its controls stayed usable at high speed. It could absorb damage and still bring pilots home. The bomber streams still took losses from flak. German anti-aircraft fire was deadly. But fighter attacks were increasingly being disrupted. Then came the mission that many once thought impossible. Berlin, the German capital deep inside enemy territory, a symbol, a fortress of flak, fighters, and pride. On March 6, 1944, American fighters reached Berlin. The 56th Fighter Group was among them. The P-47s climbed high, crossed deep into Germany, and met the Luftwaffe over the heart of the Reich. Over Berlin, the sky became a massive three-dimensional battle. German fighters climbed toward the bomber stream. The P-47s were above them. Zemke led the dive. Thunderbolts dropped from altitude at tremendous speed. The first pass smashed into the German formation. Fighters broke apart. Others scattered. The Luftwaffe tried to regroup. The P-47s came again. Dive, fire. Climb, attack again. The tactics that had been tested in October now worked over Berlin itself. Below them, the bomber formations entered one of the most heavily defended airspaces in Europe. Flak burst everywhere. Black clouds filled the sky. The bombers took damage. Some went down, but the German fighters did not cut through the formations the way they once had. The escorts held them away. The mission proved a point no one could ignore. American fighters could reach Berlin. They could fight there. They could protect bombers deep over Germany. That changed morale. It changed planning. It changed the Luftwaffe's sense of safety. For years, Germany had counted on distance. American bombers could come, but their fighters could not always stay. Now that was changing. The sky over Germany was no longer safe for German fighters, not even over Berlin. Zemke received high recognition for his leadership. But the greater result was tactical. The doctrine had worked at the deepest level of the war. By the time the Allies prepared for D-Day, the air war had shifted. Operation Overlord required air superiority. German fighters could not be allowed to attack the invasion fleet. They could not strafe landing craft. They could not disrupt airborne operations. They could not hammer the beaches while Allied troops were coming ashore. The fighter groups had to keep the Luftwaffe away. The 56th Fighter Group flew hard in the weeks before the invasion. Escort missions, fighter sweeps, armed reconnaissance, attacks on airfields, strikes against transportation targets. Pilots were exhausted. The pace was relentless. But they kept flying. On June 6, 1944, D-Day began. The 56th launched before dawn. Their mission was simple: sweep the skies ahead of the invasion. Find German aircraft before they reached the beaches. diet them. If the Luftwaffe would not come to the coastline, the Thunderbolts would go find them inland. German fighters trying to take off were attacked. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Others were shot down during takeoff. The invasion beaches remained largely free from serious Luftwaffe interference. That mattered enormously. The troops on the beaches were already facing mines, machine guns, artillery, obstacles, and chaos. They did not need German fighters overhead. Zemke's tactics had helped create the kind of air superiority Overlord required, not alone, never alone, but as part of the larger Allied system that crushed German air power before it could strike the invasion. After D-Day, the P-47 found another role, ground attack. The same qualities that made it a terrifying diving fighter also made it valuable against targets on the ground. It was rugged, it carried heavy guns, it could dive fast, it could survive damage, it could strafe trucks, locomotives, fuel depots, convoys, and airfields. The Thunderbolt became one of the great workhorses of the Allied advance across Europe. Its 8.50 caliber guns shredded soft targets. Armor-piercing and incendiary ammunition tore into engines and fuel tanks. German columns became vulnerable from the air. Rail lines became dangerous. Supply movements became costly. But the 56th remained famous for air combat. By the end of the war, its record was unmatched among 8th Air Force fighter groups. Hundreds of German aircraft destroyed. Dozens of aces produced names like Francis Gabreski, Robert Johnson, David Schilling, Walker Mahurin. These pilots were not simply aggressive. They were trained inside a tactical culture that understood the Thunderbolt. They did not try to imitate German fighters. They made German fighters deal with P-47 strengths. That was the real victory of Zemke's leadership. A good commander does not just command missions. He teaches a unit how to think. And once that thinking becomes culture, it survives even after the commander leaves. Zemke eventually transferred to another fighter group. He later flew P-51 Mustangs, different aircraft, different strengths. But the core idea stayed with him. Altitude matters. Energy matters. Speed matters. Do not waste your aircraft trying to fight in a way that does not suit it. He continued flying until he was shot down over Germany in late 1944. He bailed out, evaded for a short time, and was captured. As a prisoner of war, he became a senior Allied officer at Stalag Luft. Even there, leadership followed him. The 56 did not collapse after Zemke left. His system remained. His pilots knew the tactics. His replacement commanders understood the doctrine. The group continued fighting until the end of the war. That is the mark of a real tactical revolution. It does not depend forever on one man being in the cockpit. It becomes a way of fighting. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered the European air war with doubts around it. Too heavy, too big, too poor in a turn, not the right escort fighter. But by the end, Thunderbolt groups had destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft. The 56th Fighter Group became the highest-scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force. The flying tank had become a legend, not because it changed shape, because the pilots changed the fight. Hubert Zemke's story matters because it is not just about the P-47. It is about understanding reality. Many failures happen because people try to force a tool to do what it was never built to do. The P-47 was not a lightweight turning fighter. Trying to make it one wasted lives, Zemke looked at the same aircraft everyone else saw and focused on a different truth. It could dive, it could take punishment. It could carry heavy firepower, it could attack with speed and survive. That was enough, so he built tactics around those strengths. That lesson applies far beyond air combat. Do not fight the enemy's fight. Do not copy what makes the enemy strong. Do not ignore physics, limits, or hard numbers. Tonight's your advantage. Build everything around it. Then force the enemy to respond. The Luftwaffe wanted turning fights. Zemke gave them diving attacks. The Germans wanted predictable escorts. Zemke gave them hunters. Commanders doubted the Thunderbolt. The 56th gave them results. And in war, results change minds. Most people remember the P-51 Mustang as the fighter that changed the air war over Europe. And it did. The Mustang was extraordinary. Its range and performance helped transform bomber escort. But the P-47 Thunderbolt also deserves its place in the story. Before Mustangs filled the skies in great numbers, Thunderbolt pilots were already learning how to take the fight to the Luftwaffe. They were protecting bombers, killing interceptors, developing energy tactics, and proving that heavy fighters could dominate when flown correctly. The 56th Fighter Group became known as Zemke's Wolf Pack. That name fit. They did not wait passively beside the bomber stream. They hunted, they struck from above, they moved as a disciplined pack, and German pilots learned to respect them. By 1945, bomber losses had fallen dramatically compared to the terrible days of 1943. German fighter power was broken. Factories were bombed, oil targets burned. The Luftwaffe was slowly strangled. Many forces made that happen: bombers, fighters, mechanics, planners, intelligence officers, fuel logistics, training, industry. But among those forces was a simple tactical idea from a commander who refused to misuse his aircraft. The P-47 could turn. So Zemke stopped turning, and that changed everything. Hubert Zemke did not become as famous as some of the aces who flew under him. He did not receive the rank some thought he deserved. He was outspoken, direct, sometimes difficult for senior officers. But history does not only remember rank, it remembers impact. And Zemke's impact was enormous. He helped turn a doubted aircraft into a dominant weapon. He helped shape escort tactics during one of the most important air campaigns of the war. He helped create a fighter group whose record still stands among the great achievements of American air combat. The 56th Fighter Group proved that air combat is not just about the machine, it is about matching tactics to the machine. A bad tactic can make a good aircraft look weak. A good tactic can reveal the power hidden inside an aircraft everyone doubts. That is the heart of this story. The Thunderbolt was not broken. It was misunderstood. Zemke understood it. His pilots trusted him, and the Luftwaffe paid the price. If Hubert Zemke and the 56th Fighter Group deserve to be remembered, hit the like button. Subscribe for more forgotten World War II stories. Because some heroes do not win by having the perfect weapon. They win by understanding the imperfect one better than anyone else. And when the enemy expects you to turn, sometimes the answer is to dive.